Commander Jake Morrison stood in front of the mirror in his quarters, adjusting his uniform for the 5th time. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. 6 months of preparation had led to this single moment. Today, humanity would officially meet the galactic community for the first time. Today, everything could change. He had been chosen to lead this mission because of his service record and his ability to stay calm under pressure. The weight of representing his entire species sat heavy on his shoulders. One wrong word, one cultural mistake, and Earth's future among the stars could be destroyed before it even began. His team was waiting for him in the shuttle bay. Dr. Amy Chen was the language expert who had spent years learning the alien languages. Lieutenant Ben Harris was his security officer, a man who could read danger in any situation. Sophie Martinez was the cultural specialist who had memorized every detail about alien customs that the Zephyrians had shared with Earth. Jake took one last look at himself and walked out of his quarters. The hallway of the Earth vessel was familiar and safe. In a few hours, he would be standing in an alien throne room, surrounded by beings that humanity had only dreamed about for centuries. The shuttle ride to the Zephyrian flagship was quiet. Amy reviewed her notes one more time. Ben checked his equipment with practiced efficiency. Sophie stared out the window at the massive alien ship that grew larger with every passing second. The Zephyrian vessel was beautiful in a way that human engineering could never match. It looked like it was made of crystal and light, bending the stars around it. When they docked, Jake felt his heart rate increase. This was really happening. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and they stepped into a world that was completely foreign. The air smelled different, like rain and electricity mixed together. The walls glowed with soft colors that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something Jake could not hear. Their escorts were waiting. The Zephyrians were tall, much taller than humans. Their skin changed colors as they moved, flowing from blue to green to purple. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and their faces were different but not frightening. Their eyes were larger than human eyes, and there were more of them. Each Zephyrian had 6 eyes that could look in different directions at once. The escorts did not speak. They simply gestured for the humans to follow. Jake and his team walked through corridors that seemed alive with light. Other aliens passed them in the halls, species that Jake had never seen before. Some had fur, some had scales, some seemed to be made of energy itself. The galaxy was more diverse than Earth had ever imagined. The throne room doors were massive, at least 30 feet tall. They opened silently, revealing a chamber that took Jake's breath away. Hundreds of beings filled the space, representing what must have been dozens of different worlds. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see it, and it showed the stars outside as if there was no ship at all. Just open space, at the center of everything, raised on a platform that seemed to float in the air, sat Empress Valira. Jake had seen pictures and videos, but nothing had prepared him for seeing her in person. She was larger than the other Zephyrians, and her skin moved through shades of violet and silver that seemed to glow from within. Her 6 eyes were fixed on the human delegation from the moment they entered. The walk to the center of the throne room felt like it took forever. Every eye in the chamber was watching them. Jake could feel the weight of their attention, the curiosity, and perhaps the judgment. Humans were the newcomers here, the primitives who had barely learned to leave their own solar system. When they reached the designated spot, Jake bowed in the way that Sophie had taught him. Amy and Ben did the same. The Empress acknowledged the gesture with a slight movement of her upper right hand. Jake began his prepared speech. He talked about Earth's desire for peace and cooperation. He spoke of humanity's hope to learn from the older civilizations of the galaxy. He promised that humans would be respectful guests in this vast community of worlds. His words were translated by the device at his throat, turning his English into sounds and colors that the aliens could understand. The Empress responded with grace and diplomacy. She welcomed Earth to the galactic fold. She spoke of the opportunities for trade and cultural exchange. Everything was going exactly as planned. Jake started to relax slightly. Perhaps this would be easier than he had feared. Then Empress Valira leaned forward on her throne. The movement was small, but every being in the room noticed it. The chamber, which had been filled with quiet conversation and movement, suddenly went completely silent. The Empress spoke, and her translator device turned her words into perfect English. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the vast space to reach every ear. Commander Morrison, Before we proceed with formal negotiations, I must ask you something of a personal nature. Jake felt a warning tingle at the back of his neck. This was not part of the script. He glanced quickly at Sophie, who looked confused. Ben had tensed slightly, his hand moving closer to his weapon without actually touching it. Are you single, human? The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Jake felt his mind go blank for a moment. Of all the questions he had prepared for, this was not one of them. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Not a single being moved. It was as if time itself had stopped. Jake could see aliens around the room with their appendages raised in shock. Others had backed away slightly, creating small circles of empty space around themselves. The Zephyrian nobles closest to the Empress looked horrified. Their skin was flashing through colors that even without a translator Jake could tell meant distress. Reds and blacks rippled across their bodies in waves. Amy's hand gripped Jake's arm hard enough to hurt. Sophie's face had gone pale. Ben was looking around the room, trying to assess whether they were in danger. But the danger was not physical. Jake could feel that much. This was something else. Something cultural that they had completely missed in all their preparation. Sophie's earpiece crackled softly. She was accessing the emergency cultural database, searching frantically for information. Jake saw her expression change from confusion to shock to something close to panic. She leaned close to Jake and whispered urgently, her voice shaking slightly. Jake, in Zephyrian culture, asking about relationship status before formal negotiations is the same as a marriage proposal. The Empress just proposed to you in front of the entire galactic community. Jake felt his stomach drop. His carefully prepared speeches and diplomatic training were completely useless. Nothing in the 6 months of preparation had covered this scenario. He was standing in front of hundreds of alien beings representing all of humanity, and an Empress had just asked him to marry her. The Empress remained perfectly still on her throne. Her 6 eyes never left Jake's face. He tried to read her expression, to understand what she was thinking, but alien faces were too different. He could not tell if she was serious, if this was a test, or if he had somehow already failed without knowing it. Amy was scrolling through her datapad, searching for any precedent. Ben had positioned himself slightly in front of Jake, not threatening but protective. Sophie was still listening to the cultural database, her expression growing more worried with every second. The entire galactic community was watching and waiting for Jake Morrison to answer a question that could change everything. Jake's mind was racing, but his face remained calm. Years of military training had taught him to control his reactions, even when his world was falling apart. He could see the reactions spreading through the throne room like ripples in water. Some aliens had raised their limbs high in the air, which must have meant extreme surprise. Others were making sounds that his translator could not interpret. A few had actually moved backward, putting distance between themselves and the humans. The Zephyrian nobles were the most visibly distressed. Their skin colors were shifting rapidly through shades that the translator marked as alarm, confusion, and fear. One noble near the throne had turned almost completely black. His forearms crossed over his chest in what was clearly a defensive posture. Sophie was still whispering urgently in Jake's ear, reading from the cultural database as fast as she could. A direct refusal would be considered a grave insult. Accepting without understanding the full implications could bind humanity to agreements we know nothing about. The Empress has put herself in an incredibly vulnerable position. If you refuse her publicly, she loses credibility with her own people. Ben moved slightly closer to Jake and spoke quietly. We can get you out of here if needed. Say the word, but running was not an option. Jake knew that. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would define Earth's relationship with the galaxy for generations. He could not panic. He could not make a hasty decision. He needed to buy time and understand what was really happening. Jake took a breath and stepped forward slightly, his voice steady and respectful. Your Majesty, I am deeply honored by your question. However, I must confess that human customs may be quite different from Zephyrian traditions. I would not want to answer incorrectly and cause offense through my ignorance. Would you be willing to explain what my answer would mean to your people? A sound rippled through the court. Jake could not tell if it was approval or disapproval. Several aliens near the front were nodding their heads, or at least making movements that seemed like nodding. Others looked even more shocked that a human would dare to question an Empress. But Empress Valira did something that surprised everyone. She smiled. It was not a Zephyrian expression. It was a human smile, something she must have learned from studying Earth's transmissions. The gesture was slightly wrong, her alien features not quite designed for it. But the intent was clear. "Clever, Commander," she said, and there was something in her voice that might have been amusement. "You seek to understand before you commit. This is wise. Very wise, in fact." She rose from her throne, and the entire court seemed to hold its breath. Empresses did not stand during formal negotiations. They did not leave their elevated positions. But Valira was doing exactly that, descending from her floating platform with smooth, graceful movements. Her advisors looked like they wanted to protest but did not dare. The noble who had turned black was now flashing through colors so rapidly that it hurt to look at him. But the Empress ignored them all. She walked directly toward Jake, crossing the empty space that protocol demanded be kept between royalty and visitors. When she stood in front of him, Jake realized just how tall she was. Even though he was over 6 feet, she towered above him by at least 2 feet. Her 6 eyes looked down at him with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Up close, he could see that her skin was not just changing colors randomly. There were patterns in the shifts, a language of emotion that he could not read but could sense was important. The Empress spoke again, but this time her voice was lower, meant only for Jake and his team to hear clearly. "I will be direct with you, Commander Morrison, because I have learned that your species values directness. Yes, I am asking if you would consider a political union between us, but not for the reasons your companions fear." Amy had her recorder out, capturing every word. Sophie was listening intently, trying to parse the cultural implications. Ben was watching the crowd, looking for threats. "For 3 years I have studied your species," Valira continued. "Your broadcasts, your history, your art, your wars, and your peace. Do you know what I discovered about humanity? You are unique in this galaxy. You are the first species to reach for the stars while still divided among yourselves. Every other race achieved complete unity before they left their home planet. But not you." She turned slightly, gesturing to the assembled court. "Look at them, Commander. Every species here is unified. They have peace. They have order. They have created perfect societies where everyone agrees on how things should be. And do you know what that perfection has cost them?" Jake stayed quiet, sensing that she wanted to continue. "It has cost them their ability to change, to grow, to create something new. The galaxy has not seen a truly original idea in 10,000 years. We refine old technologies. We repeat old philosophies. We maintain what we have built, but we do not build anything new. We have become stagnant." The Empress's skin shifted to colors that the translator marked as sadness and frustration. "The Zephyrian Empire is dying, Commander. Not in population or territory. We are dying in spirit. Our artists create nothing that has not been created before. Our scientists study theories that are thousands of years old. Our people live long, comfortable lives and die without having changed anything at all." She looked back at Jake, and he saw something in her alien eyes that he recognized. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror countless times. The look of someone who wanted more than what they had, who wanted to matter, who wanted to make a difference. "When I became Empress, I made a vow. I would not let my empire fade into irrelevance. I would find a way to bring change, to bring growth, to bring life back to my people." And then Earth appeared in our sensors. "Then I watched your transmissions and learned about humanity. And I realized that you have what we lost." "What is that?" Jake asked quietly. "Chaos," Valira said simply. "Beautiful, creative, unpredictable chaos. Your species fights with each other, disagrees about everything, creates art that half your people love and half your people hate. You feel emotions so strongly that they drive you to do impossible things. You hope when logic says you should despair. You love when loving brings you pain. You are messy and complicated and absolutely fascinating." Sophie spoke up, her voice careful. "You want a political marriage to symbolize what exactly?" "An exchange," the Empress replied. "Humanity gains the protection and knowledge of the galactic community. You gain access to technologies that will advance your civilization by centuries. You gain allies and trading partners across 1,000 worlds. And what do we gain? We gain you. Your chaos. Your passion. Your ability to create and change and grow. We gain the possibility of becoming more than we are." Amy was looking at Jake with wide eyes. This was bigger than any of them had imagined. This was not just about diplomacy or trade agreements. This was about the fundamental direction of galactic civilization. But Jake had a question that needed answering. "Why me?" he asked directly. Why not propose a formal alliance between our governments? Why make it personal? The Empress's 6 eyes focused on him with laser intensity. Because I watched the recordings of what happened at Europa. Your colony was failing. Your ship was damaged. You could have escaped and saved yourself and your crew. But you stayed. You evacuated every single colonist. Even the ones who had rebelled against your command. Even the ones who blamed you for their problems. You risked everything to save people who hated you. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Europa had been the worst moment of his career. He had been censured, nearly court-martialed. His reputation had been damaged permanently. But he would do it again in a heartbeat. Your own government punished you for saving those people, Valera continued, because you damaged expensive equipment. Because you violated orders. Because you put compassion above efficiency. And that is exactly why I chose you, Commander Morrison. Because you understand that some things matter more than rules and regulations. You understand that sometimes the right choice is not the logical choice. She stepped back slightly, giving him space. That is what I need. Someone who will challenge me. Someone who will bring a different perspective. Someone who represents everything my people have forgotten. A marriage between us would be symbolic, yes. But it would also be real. We would govern together. We would learn from each other. We would try to bridge the gap between our 2 very different species. The throne room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Before it had been shock. Now it was anticipation. Every being present was waiting to see what the human would say. Jake needed time to think, but he also needed to understand exactly what he was being asked. The implications were massive, not just for him personally, but for all of humanity. He had to be absolutely clear about what accepting would mean. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I need to make sure I understand correctly. Are you proposing an actual marriage between us as individuals? Or is this purely a symbolic gesture to represent an alliance between our peoples? Both, Valera answered without any hesitation. In Zephyrian culture, we do not separate the personal from the political. They are the same thing. The Empress does not make symbolic gestures. Everything I do has real consequences. If we were to bond, you would become Prince Consort of the Zephyrian Empire. You would share my throne, my power, and my responsibilities. Your people would become full members of the imperial community, with all the rights and protections that entails. She paused, letting that sink in. But it would also mean that you and I would be bound as partners. We would share our lives. We would make decisions together. We would face opposition together. This is not a political theater. This is real. Jake processed this information. It was a bigger commitment than he had initially thought. And what if I am not single? What if I have someone waiting for me on Earth? For the first time since she had asked her question, Valera showed something that might have been fear. Her skin flickered through colors that looked uncertain. Then I have made a terrible error in judgment, she admitted. I based my understanding on human culture as I learned it from your transmissions. I believed that your leaders often sacrifice personal happiness for duty. I studied your file extensively. You have no spouse, no children, no romantic partner that any record shows. I assumed that a commander of your rank and dedication would have chosen service over personal attachments, as I have. The admission was startling. The Empress had just revealed her own loneliness to a room full of political rivals and allies. Jake could see several nobles watching with interest, clearly noting this moment of weakness. The black-skinned noble near the throne was paying especially close attention. His multiple eyes narrowed. I am unattached, Jake said, and he heard Amy inhale sharply beside him. Sophie's hand grabbed his arm in warning, but he continued. However, I cannot make a decision of this magnitude without consulting with my government and my people. This will affect not just me, but the entire human race. I need time to consider all the implications. Several aliens in the court made sounds of approval. The translator marked them as species that valued careful deliberation. But others looked disappointed, perhaps hoping for immediate drama. Valera studied Jake for a long moment. He could not read her expression, but he felt like she was evaluating him, testing his character through his response. Finally, she nodded slowly. Time, she said thoughtfully. A very human concept. We Zephyrians live for centuries. We think in terms of decades and generations. But you humans, with your short lives, you think in terms of days and hours. Everything is urgent to you. Everything matters now. Very well, Commander. You have one cycle to consider. By our measure, that is 28 of your hours. Is that sufficient? It will have to be, Jake replied honestly. The Empress turned to address the full court, her voice ringing with authority. This session is concluded. The human delegation will be provided with diplomatic quarters and full access to our cultural database. They may consult with their homeworld as needed. We will reconvene when Commander Morrison has reached his decision. She raised one hand in a gesture that clearly meant dismissal. The court began to disperse, though many beings were talking in excited tones as they left. Jake could feel the weight of their stares, their curiosity, and perhaps their judgment. Before Jake could move, a Zephyrian approached from the left. This one was different from the others. His skin was a deep dark blue, and it was marked with scars that cut through the color-changing surface. He was clearly a soldier, or had been one. His bearing was military, and there was a hardness in his eyes that Jake recognized from his own men. Commander Morrison, the Zephyrian said, his translator turning his sounds into crisp English. I am General Corvin, commander of the Imperial Guard. Walk with me. There are things you should know before you make your decision. Jake looked at his team. Amy nodded slightly. Sophie looked worried but did not object. Ben stepped closer, making it clear he would be coming along. Lead the way, General, Jake said. Corvin guided them out of the throne room through a side exit. The corridors were less crowded here, and the lighting was dimmer. They passed through several security checkpoints where guards in ornate armor stood at attention. Finally, they reached an observation deck that overlooked the vast emptiness of space. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see Earth. It was a small blue sphere hanging in the darkness, so far away and yet so precious. Somewhere down there, billions of people were going about their lives, completely unaware that their future was being decided on an alien ship. The Empress is sincere in her offer, Corvin began without preamble. I have served her family for 80 years. I watched her grow from a child to a ruler. She does not make empty gestures or play political games. When she says something, she means it. But, Jake prompted, sensing there was more. But sincerity does not eliminate danger. Corvin continued. There are factions within the Empire who see your species as a threat. They believe humans are too primitive, too violent, too emotional to be trusted. They think you should be observed from a distance, perhaps even contained, until you mature as a civilization. The general's skin shifted to a darker blue. If you accept the Empress's proposal, you will have powerful enemies. Some will try to undermine you. Some will try to use you to weaken her. Some will simply hate you for being different. You will face challenges that would break most beings. And if I refuse? Jake asked. Then those same factions will have won without firing a shot, Corvin said bluntly. They will argue that humanity is too unstable for galactic society. They will push for quarantine. Earth will be cut off from the stars, isolated for at least a century, perhaps longer. Your people will be alone while the rest of the galaxy moves forward without you. Amy spoke up. So either way, there are risks. Life is risk, Corvin replied. But some risks are worth taking. The Empress believes your species can save us from ourselves. She thinks your chaos, your passion, your unpredictability can teach us to live again instead of just existing. I'm not entirely convinced, but I am willing to be proven wrong. He turned to face Jake directly. I have fought in 17 wars, Commander. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched civilizations destroy themselves through arrogance or fear. And I have learned one thing. Stagnation is death. An empire that does not change will eventually crumble from within. The Empress sees this. She is trying to save her people, even if they do not realize they need saving. Why are you telling me this? Jake asked. Because you need to understand what you are stepping into, Corvin said. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a simple alliance. If you accept, your life will never be the same. You will have responsibilities you cannot imagine. You will make enemies who have been alive longer than your entire civilization. You will be tested in ways that will make your Europa mission look easy. He paused, his 6 eyes studying Jake carefully. But you will also have the chance to do something no human has ever done. You will help shape the future of the galaxy. You will bridge the gap between species that have never understood each other. You will prove that different does not mean lesser. And perhaps, if you are very lucky and very skilled, you will help create something new, something better than what came before. Sophie asked the question Jake was thinking. Do you support the Empress's decision? I support my Empress, Corvin said firmly. If she believes this human is worthy, then I will give him the chance to prove her right. But make no mistake, Commander Morrison, If you betray her trust, if you harm her or her empire in any way, I will end you myself. My loyalty is not easily given, and neither is my protection. But both are absolute once earned. Ben bristled slightly at the threat, but Jake put a hand on his shoulder. He understood Corvin perfectly. The general was being honest, which Jake appreciated far more than false pleasantries. I understand, Jake said, and I respect your loyalty to the Empress. Then use your time wisely, Corvin advised. Consult with your people. Search your own heart, but remember this, the galaxy is watching. Whatever you decide will echo across 1,000 worlds. Choose carefully, human. With that, the general turned and left, his footsteps silent on the smooth floor. Jake and his team stood in the observation deck, looking out at Earth and trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. The diplomatic quarters they were given were more luxurious than anything Jake had ever experienced. The rooms were large and filled with technology that seemed to respond to thought rather than touch. The walls could change color or display any image from across the galaxy. The furniture adjusted itself to fit human proportions perfectly, but Jake barely noticed any of it. He sat in the main room with his team, and they all knew they had to figure out what to do next. We need to contact Earth immediately, Amy said, pulling out her communication equipment. This is way beyond our authority to decide alone. Agreed, Sophie added. But the time lag is going to be a problem. It takes 11 minutes for a signal to reach Earth, and another 11 minutes to get a response. We will be working with 22-minute delays between each exchange. Jake nodded. Start the connection. Send them everything we have recorded. Full transcripts of what happened, cultural analysis, everything. They need to understand exactly what we are dealing with. While Amy set up the communication link, Ben did a security sweep of the quarters. He found 3 monitoring devices which he left alone. They were in an alien ship. Of course they were being watched. Trying to hide their conversations would only create suspicion. Jake paced the room, his mind working through the problem from every angle. This was not just about him. This was about the future of humanity. If he refused the Empress, Earth might be isolated for a century or more. Technology, medicine, knowledge, all of it would be kept from humanity while they remained quarantined. How many people would die from diseases that alien medicine could cure? How many problems could be solved with technology that humans would not develop on their own for generations? But if he accepted, he was binding himself to an alien culture he barely understood. He would be giving up his life on Earth, his career, his freedom to choose his own path. He would become a political figure in a game played by beings who had been alive for centuries before he was born. The communication system beeped, indicating that the first message had been sent. Now they had to wait. Talk to me, Jake said to his team. What am I missing? Amy looked up from her notes. Historically, political marriages have been used to cement alliances for thousands of years on Earth. Sometimes they worked beautifully. Sometimes they were disasters. The success usually depended on whether both parties were willing to make the relationship genuine, or if they were just going through the motions. The Empress seems genuine, Sophie observed. She is taking a huge personal and political risk. If you refuse, she looks weak to her own people. She would not do that unless she really believed this was necessary. Ben had a different perspective. From a tactical standpoint, this gives humanity leverage we would not have otherwise. If you are married to the Empress, humans become important. We become connected to the imperial family. That is protection that money cannot buy. But it is also a target, Jake pointed out. General Corvin said there are factions that oppose this. They will come after me and maybe after Earth to prove that the Empress made a mistake. They probably will, Ben agreed, but at least we will be in a position to fight back. If we are quarantined, we have no power at all. We are just sitting on Earth hoping that the galaxy decides to give us a chance eventually. The communication system beeped again. The first response from Earth had arrived. Jake played the message. It was from Admiral Patricia Hayes, his direct superior. Her face appeared on the screen, looking tired and worried. Commander Morrison, we have reviewed your report. I have briefed the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of State, and the President. Everyone is in agreement. This is your decision to make. We will support whatever choice you make. However, I want to be clear about the stakes. Our analysts believe that if you refuse, Earth will be isolated. The economic and technological consequences would be severe, but if you accept, you will be placing yourself in extreme danger. We cannot protect you once you are on that ship. You will be alone among aliens with no backup and no easy way home. She paused, and Jake could see the concern in her eyes. He had served under her for 8 years. She was more than his commanding officer. She was his mentor. Jake, I know you. You will try to make the choice that helps the most people. That is who you are. But I want you to think about yourself too. What do you want? Not as a commander. Not as a representative of Earth. As Jake Morrison, the person. You have given everything to the service. Maybe it is time to think about your own happiness. The message ended. Jake sat back, feeling the weight of her words. What did he want? He had been so focused on duty for so long that he had forgotten to ask himself that question. More messages came in over the next hours. The Secretary of State outlined the potential political benefits and risks. Scientists sent data on what technologies humanity might gain access to. Cultural experts offered advice on alien marriage customs. Everyone had opinions, but no one could make the decision for him. Jake found himself back at the observation window, staring at Earth. Amy joined him after a while, standing quietly beside him. You know, she said softly, when I was younger, I dreamed about meeting aliens. I imagined what it would be like to talk to beings from another world. To learn their languages, understand their cultures. I spent my whole career preparing for first contact. And now that it is here, Jake asked. It is nothing like I imagined, Amy admitted. It is messier, more complicated, more human in a weird way. The Empress is not some perfect being from an advanced civilization. She is lonely. She is worried about her people. She is taking a desperate chance on something she does not fully understand. That is very human, even if she is not. Jake smiled slightly. You think I should accept? I think you should do what feels right, Amy said. Not what is logical. Not what helps the most people. What feels right to you personally? Because if you accept for the wrong reasons, this will never work. The Empress is not asking for a political puppet. She is asking for a partner. That requires authenticity. Sophie joined them at the window. I have been going through the cultural database, she said. Zephyrian marriages are interesting. They are not like human marriages in many ways. There is no assumption of romantic love. It is more like a partnership, a business arrangement with emotional components. But it is also taken very seriously. Divorce is almost unheard of. When Zephyrians bond, they stay bonded. So if I accept, I am committed for life, Jake said. Yes, Sophie confirmed. But that life would be very different from what you have now. You would have power, influence, access to knowledge that no human has ever had. You would be making history every single day. Is that worth giving up the life you have on Earth? Jake thought about his life on Earth, his empty apartment, his non-existent social life, his sister who he barely saw, his career that had been damaged after Europa. What exactly would he be giving up? Ben had the most practical question. Can you imagine spending the rest of your life with an alien? Sharing quarters, making decisions together, being responsible for billions of beings across multiple worlds? Because that is what this actually means, no, Jake admitted. I cannot imagine it at all. But I also could not imagine standing on an alien ship having this conversation, and here we are. The hours passed. Jake read every message from Earth. He studied the cultural database. He thought about General Corvin's warning and the Empress's vulnerability. He thought about the Europa colony and the choice he had made there. The choice that had cost him so much, but that he would make again without hesitation. Finally, with 2 hours left before the deadline, Jake made his decision. It was not based on logic or careful calculation. It was based on something simpler and more fundamental. It was based on who he was. He called his team together. I am going to accept, he said quietly. Amy nodded like she had expected this. Sophie looked worried but not surprised. Ben sighed but did not argue. Tell me I am not crazy, Jake said. You are absolutely crazy, Ben replied. But you have always been crazy. That is why they sent you on this mission in the first place. Normal people do not volunteer for first contact. Normal people do not stay behind to save a colony when their ship is failing. You are not normal, Jake. You never have been. Is that a compliment? Jake asked. It is an observation, Ben said. But also, yes, it is a compliment. You are going to need that craziness to survive what comes next. Jake sent one final message to Earth, informing them of his decision. Then he sat down to prepare what he would say to the Empress and to the galaxy. He had a few hours to get it right. A few hours before his life changed forever. When Jake and his team returned to the throne room, it was even more crowded than before. Word had spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. carried through quantum communication networks that connected thousands of worlds. Beings from species Jake had never seen before had arrived to witness this moment. The chamber was filled with representatives from civilizations that had existed for millions of years, all waiting to see what one human would decide. The Empress sat on her throne, but Jake could see the tension in her posture. Her skin was shifting through colors more rapidly than before, betraying her anxiety even though her face remained composed. The nobles around her were clearly divided. Some looked hopeful. Others looked hostile. The black-skinned noble that Jake had noticed before was watching with particular intensity, his multiple eyes fixed on Jake like weapons. Jake walked forward with his team behind him. The crowd parted to let them through, and the silence was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Every eye in the massive chamber was on him. He felt the weight of their attention, the judgment, the curiosity, and perhaps the fear. Humanity was the unknown factor, the wild card, the species that did not fit the patterns that had been established over millions of years. When Jake reached the center of the room, he stopped. He did not bow this time. Instead, he stood straight and looked directly at Empress Velyra. He had decided that if he was going to do this, he would do it as an equal, not as a subordinate, not as a lesser being seeking favor. As a partner, Your Majesty, Jake began, his voice carrying across the vast space. I have consulted with my people and with my own conscience. I have considered the implications of your proposal for humanity and for the Zephyrian Empire. I have thought about what this means for me personally and what it means for the future of both our peoples. He paused, and the silence somehow became even deeper. Somewhere in the crowd, someone was holding their breath. I understand what you are offering and what you are asking in return. I understand that this is not a simple alliance or a symbolic gesture. I understand that this is a real partnership with real responsibilities and real consequences. I understand the risks involved, both political and personal. The Empress leaned forward slightly, her 6 eyes locked on Jake's face. He could see hope and fear warring in her expression. I also understand that humanity stands at a crossroads, Jake continued. We can choose to remain isolated, safe but limited, trapped in our own solar system while the galaxy moves forward without us. Or we can take a chance. We can risk everything for the possibility of something greater. Every major advancement in human history has required someone to take that leap. Someone to bet everything on the hope that tomorrow can be better than today. He took a breath. This was it. The moment that would define not just his life but possibly the future of his entire species. Your Majesty, I am single, and I accept your proposal. The throne room erupted. Some beings cheered, their sounds translated into a dozen different expressions of joy and approval. Others protested loudly, their objections clear even without translation. Some simply stared in shock, unable to process what had just happened. The Zephyrian nobles were the most divided, their skin flashing through colors that showed the full spectrum of emotions from elation to fury. But Jake was not finished. He raised his voice to be heard over the chaos. However, I have one condition. The noise died down immediately. Even those who had been celebrating stopped to listen. Making conditions in response to an empress's proposal was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Perhaps both. Velyra's skin had shifted to colors that the translator marked as surprise and interest. Name your condition, Commander. That this partnership be genuine, Jake said firmly. Not just political theater. Not just a symbolic arrangement where we smile for the cameras and then live separate lives. If we are going to do this, then we do it properly. I will teach you about humanity, about our chaos and our passions, about our flaws and our dreams. And you will teach me about the Zephyrians, about the galaxy, about the wonders I cannot yet imagine. We will be real partners in every sense of the word, or we will be nothing at all. The throne room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Everyone was waiting to see how the Empress would respond to a human who dared to make demands. Velyra stood slowly. She descended from her throne platform, just as she had done earlier. But this time when she reached Jake, she did something that shocked every being present. She extended all 4 of her arms in a gesture that the translator marked as the highest possible form of respect. Something that was only done between absolute equals. You have terms? Commander Jake Morrison of Earth, she said, her voice ringing with authority and something else that might have been joy. And I accept them completely. From this moment forward, you are recognized as Prince Consort of the Zephyrian Empire. From this moment forward, humanity is welcomed into the galactic community not as subjects or guests, but as full equals with all rights and protections that status provides. She moved closer, speaking more quietly so that only Jake and his team could hear. And from this moment forward, you and I are bound as partners. Not just in politics, but in truth. I promise you that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you have placed in me. Together, we will show the galaxy what our peoples can become when they work as one. Jake felt something shift inside him. This was real. He had actually done it. He had committed himself to an alien Empress and changed the course of human history in a single decision. The magnitude of it was overwhelming. No pressure then, Jake said with a slight smile, falling back on humor because he did not know what else to do. Oh, there will be immense pressure, Valera replied, and he realized she was learning to appreciate human humor. But I have studied your species long enough to know that humans thrive under pressure. It is when things are easy that you become complacent. You need challenges. You need obstacles to overcome. You need something to fight for. She was right about that. Humanity had always done its best work when facing impossible odds. And this was certainly that. The celebration and protest continued around them, but Jake barely noticed. He was looking at this alien being who would now be his partner, his co-ruler, his responsibility. She was strange and beautiful and terrifying in her ambition. They had nothing in common except a willingness to risk everything for something greater than themselves. What happens now? Jake asked. Now we begin, Valera said simply. There will be a formal bonding ceremony tomorrow. You will need to learn our customs and our laws. You will need to meet with each major faction in the Empire. You will need to establish your authority and prove that you are worthy of the position you have accepted. It will not be easy. I did not expect easy, Jake replied. Good, the Empress said, because easy is what has been killing us slowly for millennia. We need difficult. We need challenging. We need you. Amy stepped forward and quietly asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What about Earth? What happens to humanity now? Valera turned to address Jake's team directly. Earth is now under Imperial protection. No species may attack or threaten your homeworld without answering to the full might of the Zephyrian Empire. You will have access to our technology, our medicine, our knowledge. Humans will be allowed to travel freely among the stars, to establish colonies, to trade with other species. You are no longer alone in the universe. Sophie looked like she might cry. Ben actually smiled, which was rare for him. Amy was already thinking about all the research possibilities, her mind clearly racing ahead to what this meant for human science. But Jake was thinking about something more immediate. The factions that oppose this, he said to Valera. General Corvin warned me about them. They will try to sabotage this arrangement. They will come after me. Yes, they will. Valera agreed without hesitation. The noble with the black skin you see watching us, that is Lord Theron. He has been my primary political opponent for 30 years. He believes humanity is too dangerous to integrate into galactic society. He will do everything in his power to prove me wrong and to prove you unworthy. So what do we do about him? Jake asked. We prove him wrong, Valera said simply. We show the galaxy that different does not mean lesser. We show them that humanity's chaos can be a strength rather than a weakness. We show them that change is possible and necessary. And we do it together as partners. She extended one hand in a very human gesture, offering it to Jake. He took it, feeling the strange texture of her alien skin. It was warm and smooth, and it pulsed slightly with colors that seemed to respond to his touch. Together, Jake agreed. The next morning, by Zephyrian time standards, Jake woke up in quarters that were now officially his. They were located adjacent to the Empress's personal chambers, in the most secure section of the flagship. Through the massive window, he could see Earth and the stars beyond it. Somewhere out there was a future he could not predict. Somewhere out there were adventures he had not yet imagined. And somewhere very close, in the rooms next to his, was an alien Empress who had gambled her entire empire on the hope that humanity could save her people from themselves. Jake sent a final message back to Earth before the day's ceremonies began. It was simple, just 5 words, but he knew they would be quoted in history books for generations to come. First contact went better than expected. He smiled at his own understatement. Then he prepared himself for the bonding ceremony, for the political challenges that would follow, for a life that would be completely unlike anything he had imagined when he left Earth just days ago. It was going to be difficult. It was going to be dangerous. There would be enemies and obstacles and moments when he questioned everything. But it was also going to be important. It was going to matter. And for Jake Morrison, who had always chosen duty over comfort, that was enough. He was ready to begin his new life. Ready to help bridge the gap between species. Ready to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. Ready to show the galaxy what humans could do when they decided to take a chance on hope. The door to his quarters opened and a Zephyrian escort arrived to take him to the ceremony. Jake took one last look at Earth through the window, then turned and followed the escort into his future. Whatever came next, he would face it as he had always faced challenges, with courage, with determination, and with the stubborn human refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible.